All right. So it would seem I may be having some difficulties here. So if you're watching live, let me know if it's choppy or something. When I was playing the audio to the show, it was like going in and out on me. And I was like, well, I don't know what's going on there. So do me a favor, folks. If if things aren't as they seem, as they should be, please let me know because I'm not sure what's going on, but we'll just skip past the little musical intros and all that good stuff. That's fine. Let me let me get let me get started the way that it should be. Welcome to another episode of Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, thank you for giving me your time today. I know it's not early. We are doing this in the afternoon. By the way, folks, if you enjoyed the show, please do me a favor, like and subscribe. And for the really serious folks out there, please hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. All right, so we're going to try to do this show and see if we have any more weird things going on with the audio. But again, there we go. Goodness, got all kind of audio, video weirdness going on. But we're going to work to get past that. If it gets really bad, we'll just shut the stream down and I'll record it and throw it up there, and then you can just watch it delayed. But for now, let's continue on. All right. So what are we talking about today? Democrats, you have a problem. You treat your supporters like children. And I think you're out of touch with voters, to be honest with you. And your supporters, especially the younger ones, they're acting like children. Like it is so wild. In fact, let me show you a video of what I'm talking about. Like, what do you mean, DL, when you say our supporters are acting like children? And this is going to be a tough video to watch. It's only like 15 seconds, but it's still just it's cringy to watch. It's just like, wow. Like people really do this? So here it goes. Okay. Like that was a compilation all put together. And it was the easiest one that I found. It basically what somebody did was they went to like TikTok. I think a lot of these come from TikTok. So maybe if you're on TikTok, you need to move platforms. Maybe that'll help you out. I don't really know. But they took a bunch of videos and then they just kind of stuck them together side by side and just played 15 seconds worth of videos. All the video and there are tons of videos out there, people screaming and wailing over the election, over the loss. And it's like, do you even know these people? You're acting like somebody, like a family member had a tragic accident. Like you've got some of the worst news in the world related directly to your family. And as it turns out, that's not really the case. And there's probably a lot of hyperbole going on. But it's amazing. Like my candidate didn't win. And I knew he wasn't going to win, but my candidate, the one that I preferred, the one that I voted for, didn't win. And what I did was to be critical of my candidate. I didn't wail and gnash my teeth and cry about, oh my God, I can't believe, Americans aren't ready for a gay man, blah, 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 all that good stuff. No. And so when I look at these supporters, I'm like, this is your doing, Democrat. This is your narrative. You are the ones that put out a man enough video where like men were like, I'm not afraid to let a woman read a book or to, have her own voice. And like neither is any other man actually, but you put out that video as if it was necessary. Then there was another video where like I talked about it the other day where like two women were in the booth and they kind of look at each other and they're like, I kind of give this nod, like, it's okay. You can vote for Kamala Harris. And so then they did. And then one woman walks out and her husband's like, hey, did you vote correctly? And she's like, yeah, and she like lies to her husband, disregarding the whole telling women that it's okay to like, I don't want to say defy your husband, but basically lie to him. Like, I don't know that you're creating a strong family by encouraging women to act in a way that they can't tell their husband. I would never encourage a man or a woman to do that to their spouse. And but underlying all this is this view that women don't know this, that men are afraid to vote for a woman. Like, you're treating people like children. Your worldview is ensconced in the idea that racism, sexism, and all manner of bigotry are not only ubiquitous, but they're an impediment to people everywhere. And it cost you a second election. So back in episode 7, we're on like 402 now. So back in episode 7, Cheers to Cheers, I discussed why I believe Trump won his election in 2016, and I was suggesting he might win again in 2020. So I opened the show with a clip of Rick Wilson on Don Lemon's show. So here's what he said. And to give you a little bit of background, they were discussing how Mike Pompeo was rude to a reporter regarding Ukraine. And so I want you to listen to what they said. This is back in 2020. Okay. This is Rick Wilson. And he's talking about, they don't just leave it at criticizing Mike Pompeo, which would have been fine. Right. Like, if an elected official is rude to a reporter, then that's totally grounds to give him hell. And I'm good with it. Okay. And you should. But I want you to listen to where they took it after that. And this is Rick Wilson. You'll see. Here we go.
University. Right. Also, he doesn't really say that she couldn't identify Ukraine on a map. He insinuates it's just a petty attempt to put her down, right? Is that what this is?
Of course. Of course, he's just trying to demean her, and obviously it's false. And look, he also knows deep in his heart that Donald Trump couldn't find Ukraine on a map if you had the letter U and a picture of an actual physical crane next to it.
Okay, so let me pause it here for just a moment. When it comes to elected officials, when it comes to anybody who's got some level of profile in the media, they are subject to all manner of criticism and ridicule. That's the way my podcast. Now, I'm not as big as Trump or Mike Pompeo. I don't have that name recognition, but I'm putting my stuff out there and I'm giving my opinion publicly, loudly. And so therefore I am subject to ridicule and criticism. And I've always held this belief. So while and not in this particular case, but while I might occasionally disagree with the facts of the matter, I don't have a problem with going after high profile people. That's fine. Do that. Do it more often. Go after all of them. There are quite a few. So just you've got your pickings there. But let's continue and see where these guys go.
Knows that this is, an administration defined by ignorance of the world. And so that's partly him playing to their base and playing to their audience, the credulous boomer Rube demo that backs Donald Trump, that wants to think that Donald Trump's a smart one and y'all elitists are dumb.
All right. So now we're no longer talking about Mike Pompeo. We're talking about all the supporters. And it's the supporters who are dumb. He alters his voice, right, to kind of be that dumb redneck sound, like y'all are dumb and he's a smart one, right? Like he's making fun of everyday average people. We're not making fun of the people that have put themselves out there for, in the limelight where they can and should get this kind of criticism. We're talking about now just regular everyday people, right? And you might think, okay, well, maybe they just have a little bit of fun. They keep going.
You elitists with your geography and your maps and your spelling, even though
your math and your reading.
Yeah, you're reading, your geography, knowing other countries. sipping your latte.
All those lines on the map.
Only the elites know where Ukraine is. Sorry, I apologize.
But
But
Oh my God.
but you know what? But it was Rick's fault. I blame Rick. But you know, but in all honesty, you know what NPR should
Why
do?
not?
All right. So that's the end of that clip there. And this is what I'm talking about. Like, there's this attitude that if you are not a progressive, if you're not liberal, if you're not, somebody who's part of the Democrat Party, well, then you must be a raging idiot, right? Like, that's this attitude. And I think this attitude contributed to Trump's rise and his first election. I think the second time that he tried to, when he ran the second time, I think there were some circumstances. I think basically he wore people out a little bit because he didn't dial it back. He just kept going and he didn't take responsibility. So I think there was a lot of reasons why he didn't win the second time. And then I think the third time people were like reminded, oh yeah, this is what they think of me. So therefore, let's go ahead and elect Donald Trump again, because clearly they didn't learn their lesson the first time. Now, would somebody be able to articulate it in that way? No. Right? Like most people, they're not getting on a podcast. They're not the Rick Wilsons of the world. They're not the DLs of the world who enjoy the idea of getting out there and speaking publicly and trying to figure out, okay, how do I say this? That's not most people. Most people, they get up, they get their kids ready for school, they drop their kids off, they go to work, they do their job, they come home, they check the news, they formulate an opinion, they maybe rant about it on Facebook or Twitter or what have you. Right? Like that's most people. And maybe most people don't even get on social media. But what I'm getting at is that most people they're not engaging in these kind of conversations. They're engaging in more simple things and they're going to draw their opinions, and they may not be able to articulate it in this particular way. And I don't think I don't think that shows that they're dumb or anything. I just like they're not publicly trying to have a voice. Not in the same way that I am, not in the same way that Rick Wilson is, so on and so forth, right? So we're going to sound different. Is it easy to find people that don't know where a particular place on the map is? Yes, it is. And is it limited to conservatives? No, it is not. There are plenty of people. In fact, let me tell you, this is when I first realized that people were a lot more alike than they were different. Years and years ago, decades ago. Oh, it's so weird to say that. It is so weird to say decades ago. I don't like it. Anyway, decades ago, I was an evangelical, and the internet first, kind of popped up, and everybody, like if you wanted to go and argue ideas, you had to go to like a specific website dedicated to a particular thing. So if you wanted to argue, with atheists, you would go to like the atheist forums and websites, right? Like there wasn't initially there was not like the Facebooks of the world where you could just get on there and be connected or be very connected, like on Twitter, and you could have a conversation with anybody wherever about any kind of topic. Like it wasn't like that. Okay. So if you're younger, back in the day, you had to go search out particular, ideas that you wanted to discuss and that were websites were dedicated to that idea. Right. So if you wanted to, talk about Christianity, you would go to maybe Christianity.com or something like that. And they would have a forum and you would get in there and you would talk about your views. So I would go to the atheist forums and I liked to debate with atheists. And one of the first things that I started noticing was when it came to the creationism versus evolution debate, a lot of people who were atheists, what you might call now, I love science folk, those kind of people, they would say like, they would be like, well, a lot of people that are creationist, they don't really know what they're talking about. Here's like a long litany of their mistakes. They're just idiots, blah, 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 blah. Okay, fair enough. Fine. Let's go with that. Okay. Let's not argue at that point. But then they would do this. When I would see people who would support evolution, and I would be like, why? Or I would ask them a question and they would say something And it was very clear that they did not know what they were talking about. And so what I noticed was that there was this tolerance so long as people agreed with you for bad arguments, whereas when they didn't agree with you, all of a sudden the bad arguments meant something, right? Like that was a big deal. And that's when I started that was kind of like this realization that I had back in the day that people are people are people. And then you have your pundits, you have your talking heads, right? And they're different. And then you have your leaders and people that put themselves out there. And so that's about the time that I started noticing these kind of things. Now, back to my my podcast episode number 7. In that episode, here's what I said to that to the issue of Trump and to the issue of people being castigated and all this other. I said I have long asserted Trump was elected because people on the right, grouping people here, were tired of being social punching bags. They were tired of pompous intellectuals proudly and publicly using gross mischaracterizations to mock them. And one of the things that I went on to say is that people on the left are better at their rhetoric. They can like for the longest time I noticed that people on the left, they seem to have this power when it came to language that people on the right did not have. Now it's changed somewhat, but this is early on. Early on I noticed this. And friends at the time, well, they would disagree. But here are some headlines that I dug up in that episode, and we're going to take a look at them today. See, these are old headlines. Now, I want you to think as we're walking through some of these headlines, I want you to ask yourself, could any of these be written today? Would they make sense today, or would they be so weird and out of place? Or would you be like, yeah, I can see that headline being written today, not on the basis of factuality, just based on the differences between people. So here we go. All right. So this is the first one. All right. How the Republican Party became the party of racism, 2018. Okay. Let's see. What's the next one here? Research finds that racism, sexism, and status fears. And then it goes on. I don't have the rest of the headline there, but it says 2 new studies suggest Trump broadened the Republican Party's appeal by tapping into deep-seated anxieties and prejudices. 2018. All right. Next one. Another study shows Trump won because of racial, and I believe it says animosity or something. The byline here. 3 previous studies found a link between cultural anxiety and Trump voters. Now a 4th from the voter study group finds the same. Okay, maybe that wasn't such a good one. It's not quite as clear because I don't have all the text. I'm just taking quick screenshots of these. But you can look them up. They will all point in the same direction. Trump won because of racial resentment. Vox, 2017. All right. Let's see. What's the next one here? How unconscious sexism could help explain Trump's win, 2017. Hostility toward women is one of the strongest predictors of Trump's support. How hostile sexism predicts support for Trump, 2016. Right? Like this on and on and on. Conservatives, evil, and psychopathy. Psychopathy. Am I saying that right? I'm totally not saying that right. Psychopathy. Science makes the link! Exclamation point. New research shows that SDO and I don't know what SDO is, and psychopathy have a reciprocal cause relationship over time as people become more social dominant. And then it goes on to talk some more stuff. So this is from Salon, right? So like again, my mouse not working. Everything is not working today. Hold on. Let's see what we got here. I think we can do it this way. Is that going to work? All right. Let's see here. All right. Moving thing. Okay. We're going to have to use the touchpad because, when it rains, it pours on technology. All right. Anyway. All right. So continuing on here. All right. Number 8, your right wing ? You must be stupid. 2013. Okay. And now we're starting to get earlier and earlier. Low IQ and conservative beliefs linked to prejudice. 2012. All right. Continuing on. A couple more here. Racist code underlies Trump's rise. 2011. Why liberals are more intelligent than conservatives. 2010. And then I think the last one here, conservatives lack a sense of humor. Study finds 2009. That's particularly rich given today because I remember not so long ago, maybe 10 years ago, maybe not that long ago, that a lot of comedians were starting to say, we can't go to college campuses because these kids don't have a sense of humor anymore. And these are like liberal kids. We're not talking about conservative kids, right? And some of these comedians are liberals themselves. And and they were like, look, I'm not going anymore because you guys have lost your ability to be funny or to enjoy humor. So I think there's something to be said about this idea that the Democrat Party, progressives and liberals, however you want to define yourself, they have this attitude toward people that is very negative, and and they basically look at it and say, you are the bad guy. Now you might ask yourself, after that clip I played, has Rick Wilson changed much? Well, no. Here's what he had to say of back in August of this year. And it's going to take me a little bit longer because the mouse, I have to use the touchpad. So give me just a second here as I think. Okay. All right. Why are you? Oh, yeah, I know what we want to do. I'm sorry. I apologize for this, folks. Give me just a second. We will get this right back up here. Um, there. I think that's it. There we go. All right. And voila, there we are. So this is tough using the touchpad. I'm not used to this. Okay. So here we are. Here's the article up on the screen. All right. It says, I do not see any light on the horizon for Trump. Lincoln projects Rick Wilson on MAGA's retreat. Okay. So this is again written in August of 2015. Let's see if we can't zoom in on it. There we go. Let's zoom in a little bit here. All right. So what are my highlights? Let's pull up some of my highlights here. We're not going to read the whole thing. All right. In this conversation, Wilson explains how and why Donald Trump's campaign has lost momentum and focus so quickly. He also details the advantages that Kamala Harris possesses against Donald Trump, advantages that may be very difficult for the corrupt felon ex-president to counter. Wilson warns that Donald Trump and his campaign will attempt to use racism and misogyny against Kamala Harris in ways that will likely shock members of the public, but that such a tactic may actually backfire. Well, if he did, it clearly didn't backfire. All right, let's continue on. What do we got here? I know we've got a couple more highlights to look at. Let's see here. All right, perfect. So here's the question that they ask of Rick Wilson. Donald Trump and his agents, especially J.D. Vance, are already launching racist and sexist attacks on Kamala Harris. What are they going to try to do to Kamala Harris? What they're going to try to do to Kamala Harris will make birtherism look kind. This is going to be some old school racism and white supremacy and hatred of Black women. I've been trying to warn people that what Trump's campaign is going to do will be Willie Horton 2.0, if not worse. How does Trump's campaign balance those type of racist and sexist attacks on Harris with not turning off larger portions of the American electorate? So apparently, again, that did not happen. So here was Rick's response. There are plenty of ways where the countervailing messages to push back on Trump's use of racism and sexism can be very painful for him and his campaign. I have no doubt they are going to try some Willie Horton old school racism attacks. Trump and his people in the media and elsewhere are going to do everything but say the N-word in public by the time this is over. I 100% believe in private that Trump is saying such things. Now, that last line might actually be true. People do say nasty things about each other, but they say nasty things about a lot of people. So this is not limited to Kamala Harris, and it's not limited to white to women or Black folk. Nasty things are said about all sorts of people. This is common, and this is something that I think is ignored by people who believe these kind of ideas. But the problem is Democrats are poisoned by the idea that when they prevail, it's because they defeated all sorts of bigotry. And when they fail, it's because bigotry proved to be too overwhelming. Now, in the wake of Harris's defeat, people are once again at it. So let's check in on Twitter and let's see what some of the things that people were saying back then, or I'm sorry, let's compare what people are saying today with what they're saying, what they said back then. Some of the attitudes, if you will. So let's see here. There we go. It's very difficult using a touchpad. I'm not used to this. All right. All right. Here we go. So we've got this up. And what does this say here? Make this a little bigger so I can see it. Kamala is the first person running for president to be qualified in all three branches of government, and she lost to a convicted felon. LOL. I hate this racist ass country, man. Like it never dawns on him that maybe she ran a bad campaign. No, it must be racist. All right. What else we got here? Oops. Give me this. This is difficult. All right. There we go. All right. Sorry about that. All right. Literally, nobody said Kamala was perfect because she's not. But she's way more qualified than all the other people on the effing ballot. After only having a short amount of time to campaign and killed it, she deserved that win over Trump. All right. Sexism, racism was one of, but not the only reason Kamala lost. Everything is the result of multiple factors. Let's not be childish. Okay, I agree with the second line. Like, there are multiple factors involved. I'm not so keen on the sexism, racism. I think people will just keep playing a card that is comfortable for them. All right, what do we got next here? Kamala literally denied the job because she was overqualified. Okay. People don't like solutions. They like chaos, and people don't like women. They simply like men. Right. That's it. I know how I'm feeling as a woman, but I can't even imagine how black women feel right now. Kamala was qualified, well spoken. I'm sorry. It's almost hard to get those words out. Well spoken. That was tough. Anyway, and lost to a delusional old fascist felon. I'm sorry that more than half the country chose racism and sexism. I'm so sorry. I bet you are. If Kamala loses, it is because of the deep-rooted sexism and racism in this country. It's the ugly, disgusting truth. And even if she wins, the margins here should remind us of how much work we have to do, especially fellow white women. Get your crap together. Okay, if she loses, it's racism. If she wins, she's not going to win by enough because of racism and sexism. It's like all they can think about is the only thing that is preventing like 100% a unanimous win for Kamala Harris is sexism and racism. It's bizarre. It's crazy. That's what I'm saying. Like, this is a narrative that people have. I don't think it adds up. Shannon Watts. So this is the woman that created Moms Demand Action. Hillary Clinton about the attacks on Kamala Harris. Quote, it feeds into sexism and misogyny. She's being attacked by the left. Enough. If you don't want to support Democrats, go somewhere else. End quote. Shannon Watts adds, also racism. All right. It's actually crazy that Kamala is genuinely about to lose. This is genuinely just sexism and racism packed into one, because how are you telling me the one fighting for reproductive rights and the right to live is losing? I have no idea. Quite a mystery. Kamala's team ran one hell of a campaign. The best I've seen, really. Unfortunately, racism and sexism are just too big of barriers to overcome against the majority of Americans. See, I'm telling you, there are people out there that believe the majority of their Americans are racist and sexist. And I think it's because they don't actually have any other meaningful argument. They just fall back on what is comfortable. That's their safety blanket. Oh, let me grab my safety blanket. It's sexism and racism. That's got to be what it is. No, it's like, we'll get to it. All right. Out of sexism and racism, sexism played the bigger part in Kamala losing. Make no mistake, if she had been the same ethnicity but male, she would have won. Most Americans would rather have a gibbering fool with a penis than a competent, well-qualified woman. Okay. I firmly believe this country is dangerously misogynistic, and that's why Kamala is having the night she's having at the polls. If she was a man, things would be different. What an effing shame. This one is good. I like this. If Kamala Harris had done everything the same, but she was a white man, she would have won. It's that simple. And then lastly, Dean Withers. You might remember Dean. He made the rounds a while back with his debut on Jubilee. That's the episodes that I got canned because I was trying to give some feedback on him. Kamala Harris's speech is beyond beautiful and presidential. I cannot fathom how she lost to Trump, but we must move forward. See, this is the problem, folks. They cannot fathom that it's anything other than bigotry. Now, I pointed this out somewhere. Maybe it was on yesterday's episode. Dave Smith made an interesting comment. I believe it was in the Tom Woods interview that he had. And he said, if you compare Hillary Clinton against Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton was way more distinguished in her interviews and such, and had way more knowledgeable and sounded way more knowledgeable than Kamala Harris by far. And so it's like, it's weird that people have this view that, oh, it must be because she's black and she's a woman. It couldn't possibly be. Maybe she wasn't that good. Maybe compared to the opposition, she wasn't that good. Maybe we need to find somebody better. Now, a point that I've made multiple times is that if you go back to 2008, the Republicans, there was a grassroots movement to elect, to try to get Condoleezza Rice elected, black woman, 2008. Okay. Now, you might say, well, DL, it probably wasn't a very big movement, and maybe it wasn't. I don't really know how big it actually was, but I will make this point. It was a grassroots movement big enough that when she went on different shows, 60 Minutes and others, similar along that line, she was asked multiple times, would you run for president? People want you to run for president. So the movement was big enough to get the attention of mainstream media at the time. And at the time in 2008, you didn't have like the Joe Rogans necessarily that could sway the conversation publicly. So you still had this dominance by the mainstream media. And even they picked up on it and said, hey, there's something here. And so they kept asking, and she was asked repeatedly. She's like, look, people keep asking. I'm going to keep telling you, no, I don't want it. But people wanted her to run in the Republican Party. And they even had a draft Condi movement. Now, I don't know how they were planning to draft somebody to be president who didn't want to be president. But again, the point being, back in 2008, there were enough people that wanted a black woman to run that it caught the attention of the media, and she had to repeatedly say no. And that's not the first time. It's the first time for a black woman. In 1998, they didn't have a draft Colin Powell, but they basically had the same situation where a lot of people really, really wanted Colin Powell to run. Colin Powell, who was a Republican at the time, kept declining. And he would get on, the news, and they would ask him, and they would say, hey, a lot of people have been asking, a lot of donors and supporters and blah, 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 blah. They're asking if you would run. Will you run? He's like, no, I'm not going to run. I've considered it, and I'm declining. I'm not running. So this idea that we're just full of bigots doesn't appear to hold true, because the same people who would be claimed to be the bigots many are coming from the same crowd who has for decades, as I've shown you, been labeled racist and sexist and bigoted, but also had very strong and high opinions of women and people of color. And there's more. There are more people, maybe not for president, but there are more people that have been looked up to by white folks. And it's funny. Sometimes online people are like, dude, you're white and blah, blah, blah. And they'll call me, say I got that white privilege and all this other stuff. And I love coming back at them, because really not so white, right? Like maybe passing if you really want to play that game. And one time I was quoting Thomas Sowell, who is a black economist who I really look up to. I think the man has enlightened me far more than any other person outside of my mom and my dad. And so I have a great deal of respect for Thomas Sowell. I don't always agree with him, but usually, and if you were to ask me and just be like, describe him in one word, I would say brilliant. That would be my word. The man is brilliant. And I've had people come back and they go, "Oh, you just found a black guy that agrees with you." And I one time got pissed and I threw it back in their face and I said, "So what you're saying is you can't imagine that a black man would be so intelligent that he would actually influence me. That's what you're saying." Because that's what happened. That's what I'm telling people. Like, this black man was so brilliant and I've read his books and consumed them and I'm like, "Wow, like I've just learned so much." And so I have a great amount of respect for him, even when I don't agree with him. But people on the left, I think, are the ones who are racist because they cannot imagine that a black person, they can't imagine a situation where a white person is quoting a black person, or a perceived white person is quoting a black person because they have a deep amount of respect for him. No, in their mind, it's got to be because you found, am I going to say it? I'm going to say it. In their mind, white people have found the house nigger that they agree with or that agrees with them. That's their attitude. And I say that to mean it. Like, that's why I'm using this word, because I want you to understand how I really see a lot of progressives. When they have this attitude, they're looking at it and they're like, "Oh, you must have found somebody that agrees with you." Because in my mind, there's no way that that person would have influenced you. And we see it on the campaign, or after the campaign trail this time around. People are like, "Oh, she spoke so wonderful. She was so great. There wasn't anything that she could have done better." Really? We call that the soft bigotry of low expectations, where you can't even look at your own candidate and say, "I think you made some mistakes. I think there's some things that you could have done better that might have at least got more Democrats out to vote." No, it has to be anything but the candidate's failures. And this is why I say Democrats are poisoned by this idea, right? Because they treat other people like, if a woman doesn't vote the way that they think she should vote, why, she's just under the thumb of a domineering husband. If a man doesn't vote for Kamala Harris, he just hates women, right? It's never the responsibility of the people who want the vote or who are trying to convince somebody else. It is other people. It's, "You must be a bigot." That's their go-to. It's a safety blanket. Now you might say, "Well, DL, maybe that's just, a bunch of random accounts on, and some talking heads, but maybe that's not real life people." Well, I tell you what, let me show you something. So here is an exchange that I had with a local professor of political science. Let me pull this up. And it's so weird using my touchpad. Like, I never use my touchpad. I always use a mouse, and now I have to use it because I think my mouse died, and I can't reach anything to resolve it. But anyway, so bear with me here. All right, so here's this conversation that I had. So I posted, "I did not vote Trump, but I'm enjoying the childish meltdowns from Harris voters. Unlike them, I hold the candidate I voted for, Chase Oliver, responsible for his performance. Not men, not women, and not even homophobia, because he's a gay man. Grow up and take responsibility." So here was the comment in return. "This is really tone deaf, man. Voters cast their ballots for different reasons, and to think there aren't voters out there who would refuse to vote for a woman or person of color is just plain naive." Now, I actually don't disagree with that comment. I do think it would be naive if people thought that there was nobody out there that was voting on the basis of racism or sexism, right? Like, if you said zero, yes, I agree with him, and you would be absurd, and I probably would call you a fool, okay? But here's what I came back and said. If sufficient numbers of voters are simply unwilling to vote for a woman or person of color, guess Obama is white now because a lot of people voted for him, to the point that it cost Harris the election, then you will have evidence to present. In other words, okay, we're getting away from the onesies or the twosies. Okay. Because I don't care about those. I want to know, are there sufficient numbers? And if there are, then you're going to have evidence of it. And I go on and I say, otherwise, you have a narrative you will cling onto and bad arguments. And he says, to prove my point, all I need is one racist voter. Surely, out of the millions of votes cast yesterday, that is a surmountable hurdle. You, on the other hand, are offering only your unqualified opinion. I love when people are like, you're not qualified. Well, if I'm not so qualified, then unfollow me and quit listening to me. Okay, if I'm that damn dumb, then maybe I am. I mean, it's possible. I don't have an Ivy League education, but I like to read a lot and I like to observe the world around me. So I think I kind of got my head screwed on straight, but whatever. So then he goes on, he says, I like my chances. Okay, fine. Treat me like the way that every academic ever does. Oh, you don't have a degree behind you? Well, you must not be as smart as me. You must be one of them dumb fucking rubes, huh? I mean, that's the attitude that comes across. I don't know. Like, I'm not mad. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't care. I've already been there, done that with people. All right, I go on and I say finding one retard isn't in dispute. More importantly, finding one, even 10 or 100 says nothing about acknowledging a candidate's failures. And it's no excuse for unhinged meltdowns about racism and misogyny. So, okay, let's assume for a moment that there's some level of racism and misogyny. There's no reason to have a meltdown like you're a child. If you're 20 some years old, these were literal, people are taking a camera, pointing it at them, wailing and crying and screaming, stomping their feet. My 5-year-old doesn't even do that anymore. Mostly, every great once in a while. But for the most part, he's beyond that. He used to do that when he was 2 or 3, a lot. He didn't get his way, got told no. He would stomp his feet, get mad, throw stuff, scream, blah, blah, blah. He's not, I mean, he's still 5, so it happens occasionally. But this is behavior I expect out of a child, not an adult, even if. And I said, but go ahead, keep thinking about sex and race. Working out well, isn't it? Comes back and he says, clearly you've never talked to a Trump supporter. If you think none of them are motivated by racial or gender animus, get out more. That's funny. We'll talk about that in a second. And then he had a follow-up comment. I can tell you're being deliberately obtuse as a defense mechanism. I love when people psychoanalyze people online. Okay. That's what I'm doing. I'm being deliberate. Okay. This is so funny. To deny that some people would refuse to vote for Harris for reasons related to racism or misogyny is a shameful form of ignorance. Either you don't know any racist or you are one. So that's a great dichotomy but what's really funny, what I find really amusing about all this is, number one, you need to get out more. Oh, is that so? So it's funny because I actually retweeted that with a picture of me and a woman named Hannah Giles. She's with Mark Kay. Both of them are Republicans. There wasn't I didn't have anything to do last night, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, would you come out to Mark Kay's Trump supporting, not last night, but the night before, Trump supporting watch party?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So I went out there and I actually chatted it up with several people that I know who are not only Republicans, but Trump supporters. Chatted it up with them. Right. So, I tweeted this picture and I'm like, I don't know, man. You say I need to get out more. Here is me literally last night at a Trump rally, effectively. It was effectively a Trump rally. Okay. Surrounded by Trump people. Surrounded. Okay. I've even actually been to a Trump rally because I was just curious. I did that when he was running for the first time. All right. So then I point out, I'm like, I have a lot of friends that are actually Trump supporters because, as I've said before, most of my friends in real life are that I associate with on a regular basis, almost all of them are something other than libertarian. I don't have the luxury. I don't know if you'd call that a luxury, but I don't have the luxury of associating with libertarians on the daily outside of politics and stuff like that. If I'm interacting with libertarians, I'm probably doing something party related. And so, but when I'm talking and hang out with friends, I've got friends that range from diehard Trump supporters and conservatives to feminist, and I mean diehard feminist. Okay, friends, and everything in between. I'm all over the map with people. It's one of the defining features of me is that I will associate with pretty much anybody. Doesn't bother me. I'm okay with it. Like I've associated with Proud Boys, right? I've criticized them right after that, and I still had their respect. They knew I criticized them, but I did it in a tactful way. But I will associate with pretty much anybody. So that argument that I need to get out more is absurd. When I came home from that event, I passed easily 10 Trump signs in my own neighborhood. Like it feels like half my neighborhood is Trump or are Trump supporters. It may not be quite half, but it's a lot. And there are a lot of signs to show for it. Okay. And in fact, right down the way, there's a little corner. And as you go around the corner, I call that the Trump corner because it seems like every single house on that corner has at least one sign. A couple of them have like two. So there's like 4 or 5 or 6 signs down that way. Right? Like as you go around, there are a lot of Trump support, and these aren't neighbors that I've never met. I talk with them as I'm walking through the neighborhood. When we go to community events here, I chit chat with them, talk to them. I know them by name. They know me by name. Right? We have good conversations. I'm surrounded by Trump supporters. It's okay. I've survived. And there's a few Democrat supporters here in the neighborhood as well. I don't know the full makeup exactly, but I know there's a mixture of them. So this idea is absurd. My family, I jokingly like to tell people that I'm the beloved black sheep of the family. One, because I'm literally the only libertarian, and all the rest of my family, my brother, my sister, my dad's wife, my sister's family, my brother's family, cousins, they're all Trump supporters. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I do somewhere along the line, but in my immediate family, they're all Trump supporters. So that's cool. Like whatever. And I have conversations with them all the time. We have disagreements about things all the time. That's fine. So the idea that I need to get out and that I've never talked to a Trump supporter, that's just retarded. That comes from this arrogance that assumes that you know better than me without actually having heard my experiences and what has shaped my views. And there's a lot of that going around. I read you all of those headlines. That stems from the same place. It's an arrogance. And I would be willing to put money on it that anybody who tells me that I need to get out more, that I don't know Trump supporters enough, I'm willing to bet that they probably don't know like more than they probably don't know, like, and I mean personally know, talk to on a regular basis, more than about 2 or 3 Trump supporters. And then they just make up their opinion on the rest. That's my guess, because I've talked to a lot of people and I don't see any of them as racist. Now, they may have some ideas that are bad ideas. They may carry some notions, some views about groups and people that are incorrect, right? Like these are assumptions about groups. They may have these, and that's fine. I don't call that racist necessarily, but that may be part of the problem here is that my view of racism differs from the view of racism and sexism. And I think I think those terms have been poisoned. And I don't want to get into it too deep because that's not the point of this episode here. But I think part of it is that if you have redefined terms to be extremely broad, such that it covers half the country, maybe you need to rethink. Maybe what you've done is you've expanded a definition to fit your bias. You're not developing your perspective based on a proper understanding of the world. You've done it in reverse. I think that's what's going on. And I'll say this, when Trump came to Jacksonville, I wish I had this picture. I'm gonna go dig for it again, see if I can't find it on one of these hard drives laying around. But I took a picture when I was there and it was amusing. And I just sat there and I watched for like 10 minutes straight. I took a picture or two. But there was a Hispanic guy and he had this board that he put over him. And it said something like Hispanics for Trump, or this Mexican is for Trump, or something along that line. And I just watched as white person after white person walked up, got a selfie with them, shook his hand, hugged him, all kind of stuff. And I was like, and I just kind of remarked in my mind, I was like, that's not the narrative I keep hearing about Trump supporters. And this was just random people, right? Like this wasn't like I didn't go and find the good Trump supporters. I just simply looked down from where I was. I was on a balcony. I looked down and I saw this guy standing there right in the way of people walking by. And there's just people walking by. And every single one of them, if they did something that you could visibly see from a distance that showed they didn't have a problem with this guy. Right. And I've told people before, so my wife is Asian and my ex-wife also is Asian. Swear to God, that's just how it worked out. Promise you. Like I did like if you have an Asian thing, that's cool, but that's not what's going on here. Beside the point. So my ex-wife, her mother came from Korea and she spoke very broken English. And one of the things that I noticed is that she didn't get a lot of she didn't have a I mean, there might have been some people that were rude to her, but most of the time, Americans are very respectful if you just try. So she would try to speak the language, and sometimes she would run across some words that she didn't know what were, or maybe she used some poor grammar or whatever, right? But she was trying, and I think that most Americans respond very well to that, and I think that holds true to today, through to today. Okay. So I don't think that Americans necessarily have a problem with immigration or immigrants, which, by the way, in my response to this professor, I pointed out, I was like, I've associated with all these different people, and I probably know more immigrants, legal and illegal, than most people talking about this conversation, having this conversation. But anyway, so I think that you have this portion of America who's been talked about badly. I think people are pointing out single incidents and saying, well, look at this. And maybe sometimes there's some racism going on or some bigotry, and maybe there's something else. Right. And they're just kind of wrapping it all together. And they're like, nope, this is all like, you're not fully on board. You're bigoted. But what's interesting about that is that when I've talked to immigrants who have come over here, I don't know how many times, and I've talked with immigrants that have come from various countries in different parts of the world. So we're talking about Asia, we're talking about India, we're talking about, let's see, Cuba, let's see, Venezuela. I got some Venezuelan friends, and they they are some of the most they have some of the strongest support for limited immigration, stronger than some of my American friends. It's pretty wild, right? So this idea that if you have a problem with immigrants, you hate people, you don't like brown people, it doesn't match up when you start looking at different groups of people. When you start saying, okay, well, what do some of the immigrants think? Well, wow, some of these immigrants who come over here, who are of various colors, they seem to have stronger opinions on immigration than even some Americans. So are they also racist? Or is there something to the argument? This is what I mean. There is a problem in the Democrat Party with progressives, with liberals. They have this attitude that they know all. And if you don't agree with them, it's a bigotry of some form. All right. Let's see. What else do we got to talk about today? I talked about the soft bigotry of low expectations. I want to make sure to reiterate that. Look, whenever your candidate loses, the first person you should look at is your candidate, period. End of story. You look at them first. They ran in the environment that they had to work with. So when Kamala said, I will run in this country, let's just assume for a moment that everybody's racist. Okay, fine. We'll put that on the table. We'll make that assumption. So when she decided to run, she understood the waters that she was wading into. She should have adapted for it. She should have figured out, hey, how is it that I'm going to win the election if I honestly believe that the deck is stacked against me by most of America for being a woman and a woman of color? So if you didn't account for that, that's your own failure. But again, I go back to looking at other incidents and I say, I'm not so sure that's the problem, because I can see major counterpoints all over the place. And I've described them today. So what do we do from here? I think there's a threefold answer. Number one, you can assume good faith with people that you disagree. In fact, I'll tell you what, do this. Take whatever ism or phobia that you're wrapping your feelings in and bury it in your backyard, because it's not doing you any good. Assuming people are racist is its own form of bigotry. You heard me. I'll say it again. Assuming people are racist is its own form of bigotry. There, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank on his name at the moment. I could see Russell Brand. So Russell Brand had a podcast episode with a woman named Dia Khan. She produced a film called White Right Meeting the Enemy. And so she is a woman of color who happens to also be a Muslim. And she produced a film where she literally went out and met actual Nazis and white supremacists. And I don't mean people that we label white supremacists because they disagree with us. People that say, I am a white supremacist. Please don't clip that. But we're talking about those kind of people. Okay. So, and she talked with one guy and he actually ended up coming around between her, and he accredits her. He's like, he was here in Jacksonville, by the way, and he made a lot of headlines because he had a big swastika on his chest and he held up a gun with a little camera and he was, he did something and it created a huge storm. This is the years ago, like 4 or 5, 6, 8 years ago, something like that. And his name was Ken Parker. And so she ended up interviewing him. And through the interaction, he actually realized, man, this woman's not so bad. And it started making him question his own assumptions about people. And he tells you that. He's like, he's in the news afterward, and he's like, hey, look, I'm reformed. I'm different. I realized that, that I had it all wrong and that I was just engaging in hate. And all she did was be nice to him. But that's not really what I want to get at. On the Russell Brand interview, he was asking her about this. And he said, he basically says, what does your interaction with this guy tell you? And she said that my views about other people can also be incorrect. And that my flat characterization of people like him says something about me, right? It said something about, because she walked into it thinking this guy can't be changed. He's just a jerk. But then she noticed that, okay, unlike many others, there was something else there, but she didn't realize it because she walked in with her own assumptions about who he was. And they weren't exactly bad assumptions. I mean, if somebody has a swastika tattooed on their chest and they're proudly telling you about how they're dropping off literature in Jewish neighborhoods, and they're telling you that they don't like black people and Muslims and they should all be kicked out of the country, like, if you make an assumption about that person being a terrible person, it's not exactly a bad assumption. But even she had to come to the realization that, hey, there's more to people than just that. And so the way you get there is if you try to assume some good faith where you disagree. And what I mean by good faith is not, hey, this person's a good person, but just like, maybe there's more to it. Maybe I need to peel back an onion layer because there's something underneath that, or maybe under a couple of layers, but there's something there that's worth getting to, right? But people don't do that. They just, oh, you're a racist bigot, you're a terrible person, blah. And then they have nothing to do with you. Well, if that's the way you're going to be, then yeah, you know what? And especially if you're widening your definition, then you're basically going to assume that everybody around you are all terrible people. And somehow you manage to be the good one, which is weird. Number 2, hold your side more accountable than your opposition. So when Chase Oliver lost, if you know anything about the Libertarian Party, there's a lot of argument to be made that is his campaign was made harder by people within the party. And while I will concede that there is a level of that to be discussed, the same way that Kamala walked in believing that she was going to be dealing with a bunch of racists and bigots, Chase Oliver chose to run for the presidential nomination. And then when he received it, he chose to continue running, knowing that he had a lot of opposition within the party. Like, he walked into it and he accepted it, which means he has to have a plan to deal with it. So I'm not willing to say, well, you did a really good job and you would have done so much better if it weren't for all these bad people in the party. No, that's what you signed up for. So if you Democrats believe this, you signed up for it. And if you couldn't figure it out, well, that's on you. It's not all the racist and bigots' fault. I mean, Let's think about it this way. A lot of there's a lot of conversation about how intelligent liberals are compared to conservatives, and like, hey, we have fewer racist beliefs. Okay, fine. Let's go with that. How about this? If you're so damn smart, then how is it that after years and years and years, you haven't figured out how to convince the dummies in the world? How about that? How is it that you're so smart, but you can't make an argument that's convincing to somebody who's not so smart? Like, maybe you're not that smart. Maybe you are assuming more out of your skill set and your intelligence than is appropriate. Or maybe you're just a bigot. You ever think of that? Hold your side more accountable than your opposition. Start there. Number 3, find common ground before you look at differences. Okay? If you want to get your person elected, if you tell me, if you lead with, DL, you're a man, I know you hate women. Guess what? I just tuned out. You have lost. Like, you're not going to bully me into voting for your person. It's not how it works. So if that's what you're leading with, this idea that, hey, you must be a racist or a sexist, and now I don't want to be called names, and I'm not going to be bullied into it, so I'm just going to disregard you. And if you call me names later, I'll be like, whatever, you still lost. Like, I don't care that Kamala lost. And I especially don't care that she lost, given the response from people. Because if that's how you're going to act, then you deserve to lose. And if you couldn't even figure out how to nobody asked me and said, hey, DL, can we sit down and find common ground with Kamala Harris? But I tell you what did happen when I was at the DC convention for the National Libertarian Party, and we were getting ready to vote. Before we voted on our nominees, I had one of the candidates come up to me and he said, "Who's your top 2?" I think he said top 2, and I said, and this is like minutes before the election. "Who's your top 2?" And I said, "These 2 people." And he said, "Okay." He goes, "Do me a favor." And it wasn't him and his running mate. He said, "Do me a favor. I want you to think of it about like this." And he started giving me reasons to support him. He didn't say, "Well, it must be because you hate me because I'm a black man," because it was Larry Sharp. He didn't say, "Oh, it's because you don't like my running mate who's from California. He must be a liberal." None of that stuff. He didn't make any accusations. He tried to find areas for which I could be on common ground with him. That's what he did at the very last moment. And in actual, I was like, I was like, and I really started thinking about it. I was like, all right, well, maybe. And I liked the fact that he approached me with this idea that I was reachable. I like that. Most people do. So if you want people to vote for, don't send out Obama to chide black men because they're not voting for black women. Don't claim that all white women are being led by their husbands, or they're too afraid to lose their standing in society, or whatever nonsense poppycock that you guys are coming up with. No, do these things, and you will be way better off. And we might even fight a little bit less. Maybe we can even fight about policy, not about made up social ills, because that's what I think is going on. There's made up social ills here. Now, you might say, I'm gonna end with this. You might say, DL, this is all made up. That's just your perspective, and you have an incentive to think this way. Maybe is true. That's very possible. So here's another article. This is from The Atlantic, and this comes from 2017. It's a very interesting article. So let's pull this up on the screen, and let's see here. There we go. All right. So there, we're on the screen now, and let's see here. Let's make it a little bit bigger. It's the text. Republican is not a synonym for racist. Conservatives must reckon with their policies' discriminatory effects. That's different than what usually is said. Interesting. That would be more likely if liberals stopped carelessly crying bigot. This is The Atlantic, mind you, not some conservative rag. The Atlantic. All right. So let's take a look and see some of the highlights here that I think are useful to read. All right. Liberals and conservatives may never agree on whether or how deeply bigotry infects American conservatism. So you can already see they have a bias. That's cool. We all do. They don't need to. What America needs is a conservatism whose devotees feel less stigmatized and who earn that lack of stigma by trying harder to disentangle their support of small government and traditional morality from America's history of bigotry. To make that possible, liberals and conservatives each need something from each other. Now, I think this, you may not agree, and that's fine, but I think that the approach here is kind of objective and saying, like, look, there is a problem and there's a divide, but we both sides have their issues that are keeping this divide. Conservatives need liberals to stop abusing their cultural power. Although conservatives dominate America's elected offices, liberals wield the greater power to stigmatize. Now, that's not quite as true as it used to be, right? This is a little on the old side. This was before conservatives were able to get poor little old Home Depot ladies fired because they said something dumb on social media. Okay, which, by the way, hopefully you saw that episode. I ripped into him for that. Anyway, going on, when asked how they feel about talking politics, the researchers noted every single conservative respondent raised the issue of being called racist. Liberals expressed no comparable fear. As a result, they felt less need to take refuge in the, quote, safe political environs provided by outrage-based programs, end quote. Obviously, political correctness did not create white supremacy, patriarchy, or homophobia. But as the Tufts researchers showed, shaming people for their views can backfire. And it did. It backfired in 2016, and it backfired just this week. Because I think people got tired of all the social shaming all over the place. You hate trans people, you hate women, you hate little girls. And that's all we're seeing now. We're seeing that left and right. They staked their entire campaign on the idea that conservative Republicans hate a large portion of this society. And I think it's absolutely false. And I think a lot of people saw through it. Not to mention, I think that the Harris campaign just did a crappy job. They just failed. Like, she couldn't even answer basic questions. It was terrible. But nobody wants to say that because I don't, and I'm going to say this, I don't say it lightly, but I think the people that believe that she did wonderful and there's nothing that she could do to improve, I think that they don't believe a black woman could do any better. Whereas they would not have that view about a white man. Like every accusation is a confession. I think when they're saying these things, they're kind of telling on themselves. And they're like, actually, they're basically telling you, I am the one that thinks more of white men than black women, but I'm going to try to impose it upon you because you didn't vote for this person. I think they're using other people as the scapegoat for their own moral failings. And I think if they're honest, they would admit it. All right, let's wrap up this show. Let's take a look at some of the comments here. Let's see if we can get this up on the screen here. There we go. Is it up on the screen? No, it's not. Why are you not? Touchpad's touchy. Oh, no, it is on the screen. Okay, there it is. All right. Sorry, folks. I got like a bunch of different windows here. I can't fathom how anyone voted for either. I mean, I agree. I think both of them were pretty terrible. Let's see. Here's a good couple comments. So no one voted for Kamala, and then a follow-up comment. That's from Keith Garrett. Then a follow-up comment from Time Surfer Alien. They voted against Trump. I agree. I think that's largely what happened. Let's see. Here we go. Here's a good one. Until the realignment is complete, I doubt anything will change. Politics is downstream from culture, and so too is the establishment. Totally agree. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's good on the comments. All right, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your patience as we get through this week. And then we get back to our regularly scheduled broadcast at 7:30 in the morning. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me next week, 7:30 a.m., Monday through Friday, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. For now, I'm out.